Billy Tipton. The name might not ring a bell, but Billy's story is one of the most intriguing you'll ever hear. In the 1940s and 50s, Billy Tipton was a well-established jazz musician who played the American nightclub circuit. For a time, Billy Tipton even had a record deal, cutting 2 albums with his group, the Billy Tipton Trio. But it isn't Billy's musical talent that makes this story unique. Instead, it's the almost inconceivable secret Billy kept for more than 50 years that still has people shaking their heads in disbelief. Billy's ex-wives and children among them. On this episode of Mysteries and Scandals, we'll explore the extraordinary journey of an American jazz musician.
I thought he was quite a guy. He was friendly and cheerful and played very well and dressed very nice.
Billy Tipton was best man at our wedding, and when our son was born, Billy was godfather.
See, here's the catch, folks. Billy Tipton, musician, husband and father, also happened to be a woman.
If he had tried to do it as a woman, or he had unmasked himself at any point in time, he probably would have been blackballed.
Could Billy have played the role of a woman dressed as a man and been successful in show business? I think so, but I don't think Billy thought so.
Billy didn't do this to be cruel or unkind. He didn't set out to hurt people.
I'm A.J. Benza. Join me as we unravel the truth behind one of the most fascinating stories to ever hit the world of music. Sex, lies, and saxophones. The bizarre tale of Billy Tipton. On January 21st, 1989, 74-year-old jazz musician Billy Tipton was in deteriorating health. Although his days of nightclub performing were long behind him, Billy was still working part-time, booking bands for a Spokane, Washington talent agency. Billy's adopted son, Billy Tipton Jr., cared for his father during those final days.
I woke up that day, as usual, got him a cup of coffee, sat down beside him, and the next thing I know, I'm holding him up. He just collapsed on me. First thing I did was, I called my mom. She says, well, call the paramedics. So I did. They got there, put him on the floor, and started to do the usual paramedic thing. One of them turned to me and said, you know, by the way, did your father ever have a sex change? And I thought, what kind of thing is that to say? Just fix him.
Difficult enough to watch your father lying on the floor near death. Harder still to discover at the same time that your dad is really a woman. A shock that for most would require another stretcher. The question, of course, for Billy Tipton's friends and family was, how could he have kept a secret like that for so many years? And why? Well, as you might imagine, it's a long story. Biographer Diane Wood Middlebrook is the author of Suits Me.
Dorothy Lucille Tipton was born in 1914 in Oklahoma City. Her father was an aviator and a builder and racer of cars, and her mother was a very pretty woman.
Lou Raines was Dorothy Tipton's childhood friend.
I think if I could describe her back then, she was definitely a tomboy. But not every tomboy that I knew turned out to be a man. She had some masculine appearances.
Dorothy's parents divorced when she was 12 years old, and she moved to Kansas City to live with her aunt, who gave her a very, very good education, including a good musical education. And in Kansas City during the 1930s, it was a huge jazz scene that I believe Dorothy must have absorbed.
Gloria Morrison has been researching Tipton's fascinating story for 10 years.
She played the piano quite young, and when she was around 16, a bunch of the kids, after a dance at school, went into a jazz club, and this is the first time that Billy heard jazz, and she was mesmerized.
Dorothy Tipton, who already played piano, soon became an accomplished saxophonist. But when she decided to put her talent to work on stage, 18-year-old Dorothy ran into trouble.
She was constantly auditioning for groups, constantly being turned down, constantly being told if you were a man, we'd hire you in a minute.
With the help of her family back in Oklahoma, Dorothy hatched a plan.
Dorothy's cousins were there the day that Dorothy decided the way to get a job. They remembered tearing up these big sheets, putting a big safety pin, they bound her breasts, which were pretty large, put the shirt over it, coat and tie, she slicked back her hair, got her instrument, went off, auditioned for the job, got the job.
Remarkably, Billy got away with this charade. Tipton's new life passing as a groovy male jazz musician also allowed her the freedom to explore other aspects of her personality.
During those years, she played music, cross-dressing, and had a lesbian way of life. In 1934, Billy met the first person that was going to be called Mrs. Tipton. This is a woman named Non-Earl Harrell. And all the musicians who remembered Non-Earl remembered her as a show-type person, an older woman.
Billy Tipton was 20 years old, Non-Earl was 32, and married. Bill Pearson was a friend and fellow musician.
Non-Earl, I hate to say this, but when the first time I met her, I thought she was Billy's mother. She was older than Billy, and I thought, well, men do marry older women.
So quite clearly they were presenting themselves as a married couple. Billy always dressed as a man, and Non-Earl, often she wore pants too, but she was the femme part of, let's say, a butch-femme relationship.
Billy Tipton's double life was working. He became a popular musician in clubs and honky-tonks all over America and Canada during the late 1930s and early 40s.
Can you imagine putting on the clothes, trying to get the voice, trying to get the mannerisms, and then traveling around with a group of guys that are on the road? It must have been difficult.
Abe Lincoln said you can't fool all the people all the time, but then he never met Billy Tipton. Just ahead, how did Billy convince his next 4 wives she was a man? In the 1940s, jazz musician Billy Tipton was living the life he always dreamed of, on the road with his saxophone and playing with various bands. But Billy was keeping a secret that, if exposed, would torpedo his career, or so he thought. The secret? Billy's real name was Dorothy Lucille. And whereas most musicians hope for the moment they'll be discovered, Billy Tipton's greatest fear was that he would be. Billy never knew from one gig to the next if this might be the night his house of cards would tumble. Billy's first close call happened when he ran into an old acquaintance from Enid, Oklahoma, Lou Raines, also a musician.
He said, "Are you from Enid?" And I said, "Yeah, I grew up in Enid." And he said, "Well, I lived in Enid." And I said, "Tipton, hey, you're not any relation to Dorothy Tipton, are you?" And he hum-hawed a little bit, and pretty soon he said, "Louis, I am Dorothy." And he said, "I want you to promise me you'll never tell anybody." And again, I grew up at a time that if you gave your word to someone, you dang well better keep it.
Another near miss occurred at a club in Joplin, Missouri.
A lot of our business was soldier business. We were playing out in the big ballroom, and I heard one of them say, "Weren't you a girl in Oklahoma City?" And I saw Billy grin, and about that time, a friend of ours, a gambler, showed up, and whatever it was went away.
Billy Tipton was doing very well professionally, but like anybody else, Billy wanted companionship.
Altogether, Billy had 5 women who were called Mrs. Tipton. Billy was, of course, not married to any of them.
For 8 years, he found happiness with Non-Earl, the first Mrs. Tipton. Non-Earl was also one of the few people who knew Billy's secret. Then in 1943, Non-Earl left Billy and returned to her husband, but Billy didn't stay single long.
Billy met the second Mrs. Tipton in the 40s, took up with a young vocalist whose name was June. I believe June found out about Billy's actual sex, and very possibly that was what terminated the relationship.
Soon after the breakup of his 2-year relationship with June, 31-year-old Tipton found a new love, a young beauty named Betty Cox, a naive young beauty.
They met at one of the clubs. She was totally infatuated with Billy, totally loved Billy. Betty absolutely, adamantly swears she never knew.
With Betty, Billy had for the first time a real wife. She was very hardworking, didn't seem to need much sleep. She always had at least one job. She loved the nightclubs. She just adored dancing. And she was very sexy, very good-looking woman.
Although she tells me that, well, I was with this person for 7 years, and we had sex every day.
All right, we're all dying to know, so let's just get it over with. How did Billy Tipton pull it off? Well, 2 words, prosthetic device. And that's all I'm going to say about the subject. You figure out the rest. But Billy's relationship with Betty was strained.
Billy's personal life began to be a little disrupted by Betty's flirtatiousness, according to all the musicians who apparently she did have affairs. But Betty left Billy to go back and take care of her father, who was ill in Texas in 1954, and stayed away kind of a long time.
By the time Betty was ready to come back, Billy was no longer interested.
However, Billy had already found another woman, a woman named Mary Ann, who was actually a call girl in a nightclub where they were playing, and was therefore not an inexperienced woman sexually.
And when Mary Ann asked about Billy's need to bind his chest, he had an easy explanation.
Billy told her that he had been damaged in a car accident, that his pelvis had been crushed and his ribs. He had to wear bindings around his chest to support his ribs. Whatever Billy was doing, he was very self-confident. He certainly made arrangements with the wives so that they never saw him nude. And he was able to satisfy a woman who was a sexually experienced woman with a lot of expectations of a man.
By 1954, Billy had been passing as a man for nearly 20 years. He decided it was time to form his own group, the Billy Tipton Trio. Bass player Ron Kildee.
We had our first booking in Pasco, Washington, and that was March 15th, 1954. The songs that we played for the regular music was all the songs that were popular.
In July of 1956, after 2 years of touring, the Billy Tipton Trio got their first big break while playing a gig in Santa Barbara, California.
Somebody came in and represented, or told us that they were with Topps Records and wondered if we would be interested in making any recordings.
They went to LA. They had a recording contract to make 6 records. And they made the first one, and it was just called Sweet Georgia Brown.
Billy's next album was called Billy Tipton Plays Hi-Fi on Piano. Here's a sample.
There are 2 women in very low-cut dresses leaning over the piano, right down their cleavage. And there's Billy, sitting there with his diamond ring on his pinky, smiling up at them.
The Billy Tipton Trio were now full-fledged recording artists.
They start getting booked into the casinos that are being built in Nevada. And for the musicians at that time and at their level of musicianship, this is making it.
Would Billy Tipton be able to keep his secret now that he was in the big leagues? Or was this the beginning of the end for Tipton's cross-dressing masquerade? Straight ahead, we'll hear from Billy's adopted son, Billy Tipton Jr., and from Billy's wife of 20 years, Kitty. How did he keep his true identity from them? By the 1950s, jazz musician Billy Tipton had created a name for himself as a popular nightclub performer. But what few people knew was that this talented musician was keeping a very big secret. As Billy Tipton's popularity grew, so did the likelihood that the revelation of his double life as a cross-dressing lesbian would destroy him. Her. Anyway, because of this, Billy began to shy away from the spotlight, which puzzled the other members of the Billy Tipton Trio.
Billy was offered the job of house band at a casino in Reno, Nevada in 1958, where they would have been immediately backing big stars like Liberace, and the boys were just thrilled at this prospect. And when Billy said no, it baffled them. Recognition in the music business for Billy carried the risk of being recognized as Dorothy.
In 1958, 44-year-old Billy Tipton decided to call it quits. The band was in shock.
This offer was to them the thing that they've been working for ever since they joined Billy's band. He explained to them that he had been offered a job in a booking agency in Spokane. He was going to become a partner of their agent and go into an office job. And that was the way he was going to go off the road.
So Billy and Mary Ann, the 4th Mrs. Tipton, moved to Spokane in 1958. Billy worked at the talent agency during the day and picked up small gigs in local clubs at night. One night, Billy met the woman he called the love of his life, a beautiful stripper by the name of Kitty Kelly, the Irish Venus.
I came in to have rehearsal, and I scared Billy to death because, well, I had a reputation. When I walked into a room, everybody paid attention. And I used to wear high heels that had metal in them, and when I walked, I would clack.
And Kitty clacked her way right into Billy's heart. By 1960, Billy's 7-year relationship with Mary Ann was over, and Kitty Kelly became the next Mrs. Tipton. The two were married in a civil ceremony on St. Patrick's Day, 1962. Obviously, this marriage wasn't technically legal, but the following year, Billy and Kitty managed to adopt a child, the first of 3 sons. Billy Tipton Jr. speculates about his father's desire to have children.
I think he wanted somebody to love, but he also wanted somebody to love him. I know he wanted children. I think that the mother part of him. There was, I'm positive, a part of him that was always a woman. Even though he denied it, he knew that he couldn't cancel that out totally. And I think part of that was the motherhood thing.
They went to such lengths to be ordinary. Kitty just dived into such things as the Boy Scouts, the PTA. She was a full-time mom.
In other words, it's a happy Tipton family here.
He was a very devoted father. They went camping with him. He did all those things that dads do.
Kitty Tipton was married to Billy for 20 years. To this day, Kitty contends she never knew her husband was a woman.
I had no reason to question, okay? I don't know why people want me to say something else. I have no way of knowing, because no, we did not have physical contact. And that's what Billy wanted. To me, Billy was Billy, okay? Because see, that's what Billy and I really were. We were friends. We weren't man and wife. People accuse me of different things. Did they ever stop to wonder why I felt or how come? Who knew that we were going to have to explain everything we did? We just lived our life and had a lot of fun.
Up next, the final leg of Billy Tipton's bizarre journey. How did Billy's plan to take his secret to the grave fall apart? As pianist and saxophonist, Billy Tipton retired from the nightclub circuit in the late 1950s. And for the next 30 years, he lived quietly in Washington State. Billy spent most of those years with his wife, Kitty, until their divorce in 1979. He remained devoted to their 3 adopted sons. But by 1989, Billy's health was in rapid decline. Bleeding ulcers complicated by emphysema meant the end was near for the 74-year-old musician. Billy Tipton was determined to take the secret he'd kept for more than 50 years right to the grave. Tipton had a plan, but fate stepped in instead.
He had actually asked his cousins if they would promise to answer any call he might make to them to tell them he needed their help if he ever got to the place where he thought he couldn't take care of himself. Now, the cousins knew Billy was female, and the cousins were very, very eager to be useful to Billy.
But Billy got too sick, too fast to make that call to his cousins.
He just could have stepped out of the role in Spokane, flown to Kansas, and stepped off the plane, a little old lady in a pantsuit. Billy didn't do that. Billy stayed in his male persona to the very last breath he took.
That last breath came on January 21st, 1989. Billy Tipton Jr. woke early that morning to find his father near death. Billy Jr. called the paramedics.
Sure enough, they went to resuscitating with the paddles, and they opened the chute, and well, there was a big picture. I was the only one that saw that. I'm not really sure what I thought at that moment, but all I remember is that it shocked me so much that I fell out of the front door.
Billy Tipton's death shocked and saddened his friends and family. But of course, it was the revelation of Billy's true sexuality that turned his death into a media circus. Billy's family, especially his sons, had a difficult time making sense of everything.
One of them said, well, he's always going to be Dad to me. And I think the love that he fostered toward his fatherhood was a permanent legacy for them.
There was no reason for me to look askance at this person. When I found out about it, I said, "Oh, you poor baby." Now, that was just my reaction. I felt pain for that person.
Big deal. He was a woman. Who cares if it makes sense? That's what I've always had a problem with, is the fact that I lived with this man. I knew this man for 20 years. My mother knew him for a lot longer than that. You know, and she doesn't have a problem with it, and I don't have a problem with it. Why should anybody else?
I wasn't impressed with the fact that they had found out that he was a woman, so much as I was saddened by his death. So he was a woman. So on. He was a good player.
Dorothy's transformation of herself into Billy, I believe, was an unmitigated success. I believe it was the solution to the problem of being not only a musician, but of being Dorothy.
I never have stopped thinking about Billy other than as a fine human being. I was just tickled pink to have the opportunity to be around Bill Tipton, and he enriched my life every time I was around him. I lost a very, very good friend.
Billy was kind of a modern Huck Finn. You remember the story about Huck Finn and why he wanted to take the raft and go down the river? That person knew music, and that was the magic carpet that allowed these soaring, wonderful, beautiful feelings inside.
Billy Tipton wasn't a boozer, he wasn't a doper, he never smacked anybody. So he was a she who liked to dress up and play good music. And not one person has one bad thing to say about Billy Tipton. And in this business, that says it all. I'm A.J. Benza. Join me the next time we try to make sense out of this strange world called show business.